Well, I think it's safe to say that this is Zac Efron's best ever performance. Sorry, High School Musical fans.
Ever since I was a child, people said my family was cursed. Mom tried to protect us with God. Pop tried to protect us with wrestling. He said if we were the toughest, the strongest, nothing could ever hurt us.
The Iron Claw is the latest film being put out in theaters by A24. It is directed by Durkin, who some people may not know. He directed a pretty amazing film, Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, about a decade ago, and then also directed a film called The Nest to critical acclaim. This film essentially follows the Von Erich family, so it is based on a true story. The Von Erich family was a family of wrestlers, father and the boys all essentially becoming very well known in the wrestling world. Unfortunately, a curse has followed the Von Erich family, resulting in tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Most of the kind of hype around this film has centered on Zac Efron and his body transformation. I can say, seeing it on the big screen, Zac Efron is jacked out of his mind. He is huge, and the other brothers are pretty jacked as well. This film also stars Jeremy Allen White and Harris Dickinson, among several other talented actors and actresses. This movie is about wrestling, yes, and we'll get to some of the wrestling scenes in a bit. They were actually pretty well done and amazing to watch, but this movie, The Iron Claw, is about a lot more than that. It is about family, it's about trauma, and it's about masculinity, what it means to be a man. The Von Erich boys grew up in a household with a lot of pressure, primarily from their father, a very traditional, masculine father figure. Their father was a successful wrestler in his own right, but never quite achieved the heights that he desired, and put that pressure onto his sons. The boys would often hear things like, "We don't talk about that," or "Boys don't cry," or "Just get stronger." These are things that I think any man has heard growing up and even into adulthood. As the film progresses, we can quite clearly see the impact that these pressures have. Oftentimes, mostly Zac Efron's character tries to speak to either his father or his mother, and they essentially brush it off. They either say that it doesn't matter, or they say that it's just something that the brothers need to figure out amongst themselves. By not having that support, we see this quote-unquote curse begin to worsen as the boys go through life. There's a quote, and it actually comes from the Von Erich's mother, but I think it very aptly kind of connects these thematic ideas together. She said something, and I'm paraphrasing, she said something along the lines of, "I once had my reasons, but I forgot what they were." And you can see this kind of idea present throughout the film. Perhaps at one point, the Von Erich father had the greatest of intentions, but somewhere along the line, those got lost. And I think we as humans can take a lot away from that idea in this film. It's important to reflect and ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? The boys, a lot of them were doing it because they were told that that's what they had to do, because they wanted to finally live up to their father's expectations, not necessarily because it's what they wanted to do. The movie's title, The Iron Claw, comes from the Von Erich's father's signature wrestling move. He would perform the Iron Claw on his opponents, and it would almost inevitably be the knockout move, the move that would win him the match. So in a literal sense, of course, that's where the film's title comes from, but it can be looked at in so many other ways. Most notably, the Iron Claw is this grasp that the father had on his family. It was inescapable. Whenever the boys started to challenge him and his leadership and his parenting and his coaching, they were turned aside, they were embarrassed, they were ridiculed, and because of that, they ended up giving in to his will and ultimately giving in to the family curse. Now, all of that being said, there is still just a lot of amazing wrestling here. I was fortunate enough to catch this at the Canadian premiere with Bret the Hitman Hart, the wrestling legend, and I do think that this particular film lived up to its portrayal of wrestling better than some other films in the past. And a lot of this is due to the cinematography from Matthias Erdely. He is probably most well known for working as director of photography on Son of Saul, but he did a really great job here. Interestingly, most of the wrestling scenes were actually shot in full in these very long takes, and then bits were taken from that and put into the film. So these actors were sometimes actually wrestling for 15 minutes straight with a real crowd of wrestling fans. And you can feel that authenticity seep through the big screen. The cinematographer here made a lot of interesting choices. At times, there's a use of very long lenses, handheld. So we have this kind of shaky footage, sometimes subjects slipping in and out of frame, almost like we're voyeurs watching something that we shouldn't be privy to. And that makes sense with this film because it really is kind of an insight into this internal life and tragedy of the Von Erichs. Seemingly in contrast, though, there's also heavy use of these very macro detail shots, sometimes of inanimate objects, not even of the subjects themselves. There's one particular shot that featured heavy in the trailer where we have one of the Von Erichs going back and forth from one side of the ring to the other, and we're just focused on the ropes. These techniques certainly drew me in, and I think are a testament to the cinematographer. Beyond that, the 80s aesthetic was awesome. It just felt like a real home that we were entering in when we were spending time with the Von Erichs. The haircuts, amazing. Everything really did come together and create this 80s kind of throwback atmosphere. Now, obviously, people want to hear about the performances, most notably Zac Efron. Admittedly, I've always struggled with Zac Efron, with kind of believing that he is the character that he's portraying. And this is certainly the closest that I've gotten to forgetting that I'm watching Zac Efron and really starting to believe in the character. You can tell that this performance meant a lot to him. He had been working on transforming his body, for example, for quite some time in preparation. And as I mentioned earlier, he is huge. He packed on a tremendous amount of muscle for this film. And he was able to, despite kind of this like hyper masculine exterior, provide quite an emotional performance. I will say at times his performance approached a slight melodrama for me, but it still resonated. I still empathized with his character quite deeply, and it had me emotional. There were no obviously weak performances in this film. I think all of the cast was relatively strong. If I had to say the strongest performance, I would probably lean towards Jeremy Allen White. His performance, I think, captured the most kind of like subtle nuance. His struggle was slightly different than the other brothers, as he was almost an Olympian for discus, but then had that taken away as a result of the Cold War. And we could see his character struggling somewhat silently through the first couple acts, and then finally being taken over the edge in our third and final act. As I mentioned previously, sometimes the emotion felt a little bit melodramatic, a little bit forced. The final scene, if just read on paper, I would have said, oh, this is cheesy, this is over the top, but it still hit me emotionally, so I really can't fault it too much. It did exactly what it intended to do, and by the sniffles that I could hear around me in the theater, it seemed to have that effect on a lot of people. In the end, December is a pretty amazing month for film. I already have a couple, including The Iron Claw, make their way into my top 10 of the year, with only a few more films to check out. Some reasons to watch this film: obviously, if you want to witness Zac Efron's transformation, it's pretty amazing. If you're a fan of wrestling, I do think that this film does it some justice. And honestly, it is a raw, it is a real, it is an emotional portrayal of family, of trauma, and of masculinity. Why you might not want to watch this film: if you're looking for just like a purely wrestling film, this isn't it. Yes, there is a ton of it in here, but that is not the central point of the movie. Other than that, perhaps it is a tad cheesy in a couple moments. Perhaps emotion is forced occasionally, although I don't think that that's too much of a problem that detracts from the film overall. At the end of the day, I would give The Iron Claw a solid 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend checking it out in theaters. If you made it this far, thank you, I appreciate it. Feel free to do the subscribe thing, the like thing, the comment thing, and hopefully watch the next one. Cheers.